Hi! This is Dinosaur King, and today I'd like to bring you a little special. I know what you're thinking. Oh god, another one of these? Really, dude? Now, listen, and trust me, I have a pretty good reason I'm doing this. Now, this has come to my attention that apparently there's a hybrid war going on in which basically involves creating a hybrid to take on the Indominus 2.0, which is originally made by Goji Center themselves. And pretty much not long after, someone by the name of Goji Guy made a hybrid to at least attempt to take on the Indominus 2.0, which kinda got nerfed by a little something called reality check, without Goji Center even bothering to change theirs. And of course, since then, so many people decided to have their take on attempting to bring this beast down, which essentially caused the hybrid wars, in which, well, this has kind of been posted prior to the whole submission thing being closed. So, you know what they say, better late than ever. But of course, you did see the title of the video, so I'ma get straight to the point. I've been looking through a lot of hybrids, and I've started to see a few strategic formations happening here and there. For some, like Madly Mesozoic, it was in the form of utilizing a tough and durable herbivore like Samson. And then of course, Goji Guy himself decided to step back into the ring, but this time with a fully aquatic hybrid known as Vex. And of course, it was while watching that video, Goji Guy definitely had the right idea. The only problem with a lot of hybrids that I've been seeing so far is that a lot of them are very limited to the ground. However, unlike Goji Guy, where he took his new hybrid to the waters, I'm taking mine to the skies. And I'm going to be using 9 species, just like how Goji Center did with their Indominus 2.0. However, it's already been addressed by Goji Center themselves is that no kaiju DNA will be used. Which also means that using real dragons is also out of the question. But I'm not without my resources. Especially considering that I'm going to be using a lot of real-world animals for this, ranging from the ones within our own fossil record, all the way to the ones that are alive today. And that's more than enough for me to work with. Now, a lot of hybrids I've been seeing so far were all essentially designed for one thing: war. In this scenario, genetic engineering was so advanced and revolutionary that a lot of companies started taking interest in it. So much so, to the point of allowing the top geneticists to create hybrids of their own, only for these companies to let them loose upon the world, thus causing a hybrid war. And as far as the world's concerned, a lot of hybrids that were created were essentially referred to in a similar fashion as the Indominus 2.0 as monsters. And in order to fight monsters, a team of top geneticists under the supervision of a world union were tasked to creating a monster of their own. And what better monster than something that has haunted our imagination for the longest time. And of course, it was all thanks to making an agreement with Biosyn, who provided the necessary genetic components and resources for the project, in order to create something that could potentially act as a counter against the raising hybrid threat. Starting off for the base of the hybrid, we are going with the Yichi.
Huh?
Okay, hear me out. I know this is a bit of a shocker of why I chose something like the Yichi as its base genome, but if you look closely, it does have, like, dragon-like traits. You know, the lizard-like head, the bird-like talons, and also the iconic bat-like wings a lot of dragons seem to have in common. Well, at least for the Western ones, anyway. And of course, speaking of wings, it does have a particular index finger bone that essentially forms its bat-like wings. And if it's anything like bats, it probably would have a sharp turn radius, although maybe not as sharp as bats, but it does help when maneuvering around a lot of trees and tall rocks. However, the thing with Yichi is that it didn't really fly at all, but rather it was a glider. and not to mention that this thing's literally no bigger than a pigeon. If I want my hybrid to stand a chance, or at the very least live up to its namesake, then it's going to need a lot of upgrades. Of course, when it comes to both size and flight capabilities, there is no better pick than the Quetzalcoatlus. Now, Quetzalcoatlus is an Azarchid, as in, it is part of a group of pterosaurs that not only reached large sizes, but they're still capable of flight. And of course, the secret to that is literally within its bones, where it has hollow chambers inside, thus making it lighter than what its size would suggest. Now, considering the fact that the Quetzalcoatlus that appeared in Jurassic World Dominion is literally twice the size of its real-life counterpart, I'm going to make my hybrid literally half that size in terms of height, but also keeping its 23-meter wingspan. The reason for this is very simple. If I were to increase Ichi's size to that of Quetzalcoatlus, it would constantly fall over. However, if I were to give it the similar structured limbs as Quetzalcoatlus, as well as its wingspan, it could better support its newfound size. Of course, that not only means that my hybrid can now fly up to 128 kilometers per hour, it could also gallop as well. And if that wasn't enough, the index finger inherited by the Ichi would give my hybrid better control when flying around within the air. And not to mention the fact that it now has a similar ribcage and organs from the Quetzalcoatlus, that would give my hybrid the necessary cardiovascular system needed to provide a proficiency with this extreme upscaling. When it comes to stability as well as balance, there is no better pick than Dimorphodon. Now, this small pterosaur might not look like much, however, there is one particular trait that could prove useful for my hybrid, its tail, which is used for both stability during flight and providing balance while on the ground. However, if I were to give my hybrid a long tail, it would inevitably become draggly, and a huge part of dragons is their flight speed, which is a little something I'm not willing to sacrifice. I will have to carefully select the size and length of the tail, not only to prevent it from being long enough to cause drag, but also not too short to make the two aforementioned traits near to being completely absent. The fourth species I shall be taking DNA from is the Megalania, and not for the reason you might think. Megalania, alongside other monitor lizards, are well known for their bite, which are both nasty and venomous. While they use their venom to subdue their prey, iron coating on the edges of their teeth allowed them to not only remain sharp and ready, but also aids them with ripping and tearing into flesh. I want that iron coating, and I also want similar structured teeth particularly for that reason. Though its teeth are not going to be hollow on the inside, considering our hybrid in question wouldn't necessarily need venom. In fact, there's already an animal that shall provide something far potent, and that shall be revealed soon. While having iron-capped teeth in flight could provide an advantage, it would be foolish not to apply the necessary traits to tackle and provide a form of protection. This is why I chose the Caprosuchus. You might be thinking, why this instead of Dracorex, where it does have some resemblance to a dragon? Firstly, Dracorex isn't even its own genus. It's actually been proven to be a juvenile Pachycephalosaurus. Secondly, this croc has a lot more to offer than just looks. Caprosuchus was a semi-aquatic predator, much like most crocodilomorphs. Although, it does have a few key traits that would have allowed it to hunt on land as well. Straight off the bat, the skull of Caprosuchus is primed with tusk-like teeth, which not only allowed it to grapple onto prey, but also works well when it comes to tackling prey on land or in water. As for the other traits, the only other form of information about Caprosuchus so far is the fact that only its skull was found. Though, there is a crocodilomorph that's alive today that does live a pretty similar lifestyle as Caprosuchus, the Cuban crocodile. Like many crocodilians, the Cuban crocodile is covered in thick yet flexible scales. However, there is one thing that sets him apart from most crocodilomorphs that Caprosuchus may have in common if it's anything to go by. And that would be their ability to gallop at speeds of 24.1 to 35.4 kilometers per hour. Applying these traits would not only give my hybrid protection, and possibly increasing movement speed while on the ground, the tusk-like fangs of Caprasuchus would definitely aid my hybrid when it comes to grabbing larger targets and shoving them around with the neck strength of the Megalonia. It would also allow my hybrid to thrash smaller targets around like ragdolls. And to add insult to injury, I did take a closer look at the Caprasuchus' skull and noticed that it had some similarities to that of the saltwater crocodile. And considering the fact the bite force of Caprasuchus isn't really well calculated, it's probably safe to assume that it could have a bite force of 3,700 pounds per square inch, which is pretty respectful. Of course, I could apply that same bite force to my hybrid, which should enhance its capabilities further.
And also because I think it's funny.
And now for the sixth animal, we have the Hast Eagle. The Hast Eagle was one of the most dominant avian predators within the skies of New Zealand during the late Pleistocene, and there is a reason for that. Like many hawks, the Hast Eagle had hooked talons on its feet, which not only allowed it to snatch up smaller prey, it would have also allowed them to tackle larger prey as well, such as moas and even primitive humans. With these talons, our hybrid is now more than capable of not only swooping down from the skies, but it would also apply gnashing wounds on would-be targets. This would also allow our hybrid to grapple onto, well, whatever it could grab onto, really. The only problem with these talons is that it would make moving on land difficult, if it were to be bipedal, that is. However, thanks to the Quetzalcoatlus and Dimorphodon, our hybrid wouldn't really suffer this problem due to both pterosaurs having a quadrupedal stance, meaning that it's still capable of galloping. If anything, the hind limbs of the Hast Eagle plus the limb strength of the Caprasuchus would aid it in lifting itself off the ground in order to take flight. Although, talons are not the only tools the Hast Eagle has in its disposal. The hooked beaks of hawks make excellent tools when it comes to picking apart or hacking into flesh like a hatchet. And of course, the Hast Eagle would be no different. I will be applying that same beak to my hybrid. Of course, while selectively fusing both the front tusk-like teeth of Caprasuchus with the beak of the Hast Eagle, in order to create a triple beak of sorts. I shall also apply the iron capping from the Megalonia's teeth to the beak of my hybrid. That way its beak is just as sharp and ready as its teeth. And if they're anything like hawks and eagles, they would have also had incredible eyesight with sharp focus, as well as a field of vision of 280 degrees, which is sharper than the 180 degree field of vision found in humans. This means that our hybrid could spot its target first, before they could even see it. For the seventh creature I will be using to provide both brains and resilience, the crow. It is well known that crows, alongside ravens, are one of the most intelligent birds on our planet, especially considering the fact that crows themselves possess 1.5 billion neurons within their brains, which would have allowed them to solve problems as well as use tools and set up various strategies. They also have excellent memory, meaning that they can not only recognize their own reflection, but also recognize other members of their kind. They can even remember and recognize human faces, as well as being able to mimic their voices. And if that wasn't scary enough, they can even smell the fear and stress of other creatures as well. If it were true, then this intelligence would not only aid our hybrid in terms of forming complex strategies, as well as hunting in groups, it would also be quite intimidating if my hybrid can smell and exploit any given chance of fear. And what about if diseases are thrown into the mix? While crows can contract various diseases, they are also known to survive and develop an immunity over time. Though I doubt any disease would fatally affect my hybrid due to its size, the crow's immunity system should aid my hybrid with being able to shrug off any form of disease if it were to become susceptible. And if the Quetzalcoatlus was mostly a scavenger, that would most likely enhance our hybrid's immunity system indefinitely, if other known scavengers like vultures were anything to go by. Though, I might not be able to have my hybrid spew out fire like most traditional dragons. I could, however, apply 2 more animals into my hybrid's genome that could have it do something similar. First of which is the spitting cobra. Now, the reason why I picked this animal, it's literally in its name. These snakes are known to have the ability to spray venom from specialized glands inside of their mouths as a form of defense against would-be predators. The range of which they can spray this venom from is a maximum of 3 meters or 10 feet. And of course, they usually aim for the eyes, in which their venom is known to induce intense pain while damaging the ocular membranes as well as the cornea. If I were to apply these glands to our hybrid, it could allow it to possibly spray from 6 meters or 20 feet to 9 meters or 30 feet, which should give our hybrid a distance from its target if needed. However, this venom could only do so much. I want its spitting range to be more fatal. Which brings us to our 9th animal, and the one species that shall give our hybrid an edge in that department: the bombardier beetle. This beetle has a particular trick within its, abdomen that shall complete our hybrid's build in order to bring all of its traits into harmony. Firstly, these insects have 2 chambers within their bodies. One that produces hydrocortisone, and the second produces hydrogen peroxide. When these 2 chemicals meet, it would end up producing a form of acid in which the bombardier beetle shall unleash in a series of rapid squirts from its gland, which do look like small explosions upon first glance. In reality, and this is the second part, its acid spray is also a form of heated liquid, in which the bombardier beetle can reach temperatures of 212 degrees Fahrenheit or 100 degrees Celsius, which is more than enough to basically burn skin. If I were to apply the same chemical compound along with the 2 chambers of the bombardier beetle with the mechanism of the 2 glands of the spitting cobra, this should give my hybrid the range attack needed to truly live up to its title as a dragon. Though, it probably wouldn't be able to rapidly fire this substance like how the bombardier beetle could. The range provided by the spitting cobra's glands should prove to be effective towards any target within range, especially if it's aiming for the eyes. The problem with such chemical weaponry, though, is that it could potentially backfire and wind up burning our hybrid's face if we're to use it. However, if we're able to place each of its glands where its upper beak is, and where its tusk-like growths of its beak are located, as well as applying some of the same tough but flexible material found in the bombardier beetle into its scales, claws, and beak, this should give our hybrid the protection needed when it fires this compound from its mouth. This is also why I mentioned applying the organs of the Quetzalcoatlus earlier, because our hybrid is going to need the necessary internal system needed to produce these 2 chemicals within these glands. If we were to put our hybrid's internal system with that of the glands of the bombardier beetle, this should supply our hybrid with these 2 chemicals when it's needed. As for how we're going to keep a healthy population of these creatures within the presence of potentially deadly monsters, we already have a solution for that. Cuban crocodiles can lay clutches of eggs that range from 30 to 40 eggs, while larger species like saltwater crocodiles can lay a maximum of 60 eggs at best. If the Caprasuchus was anything to go by, this should give our hybrid a fighting chance to stay as abundant. Not to mention the fact that crocodiles are excellent parents, as they would often carry their offspring safely within their mouths upon hatching. And of course, the offspring of our hybrid would be no bigger than a pigeon upon hatching. Small, but not completely defenseless, especially if we're talking about monitor lizards like Megalonia. In the case of Komodo dragons, they pretty much had no other predators within their own ecosystem. That's because of the fact that they have 4 stages within their life cycle that would wind up occupying a niche for each stage. Hatchlings live an arboreal lifestyle, as they would spend most of the first year living within the treetops while feeding on insects, small lizards, and a few other small tree-dwelling animals to name a few. When they grow larger, they begin to adapt to life on the ground as they start seeking larger prey they could tackle. As they reach maturity, they begin to utilize ambush strategies in order to hunt their prey within tall foliage. And as they reach adulthood, around 8 to 10 years of age, they pretty much become the apex predators of their environment. Even smaller Komodo dragons wouldn't want any beef with them. Perhaps my hybrid could have a similar lifestyle, minus the cannibalism part, which should improve our hybrid's survivability rates. especially while under the care of their own parents. Though, hatching into that size would take about 30 years before reaching full maturity. In the Jurassic universe, however, even the largest non-hybrid dinosaurs, like Brachiosaurus, managed to reach full maturity quite rapidly, which could explain how InGen managed to have fully grown dinosaurs on Isla Sorna within 3 years before transferring some of them to Isla Nublar in 1988, meaning that accelerating the growth rate of dinosaurs without any form of hybridization has already been established. So, I don't see why I couldn't exactly apply that same logic to our draconic ruler of the skies for similar numbers. And if that wasn't enough, both monitor lizards and crocodiles can go through something called parthenogenesis, where, like in the case of the dinosaurs in Isla Nublar during the events of Jurassic Park, or even in the case of Blue, they can simply produce fertilized eggs without necessarily needing a mate. However, we are still going to include males of our hybrid in order to promote genetic diversity, in order to provide healthier individuals of our hybrid. With the Genome for Humanity's last defense against the rising hybrid threat sequenced, the geneticists of the project will raise a group of these creatures in order to prepare them for the war that has arrived to the mainland. Introducing Pteryx Vipera, the new rulers of the skies and the liberators of the rising hybrid threat. Pteryx, of course, meaning dragon's wing, and Vipera referring to the one snake within its genome. And just like how I've seen a lot of people give their hybrids names, I shall also be giving mine a name. The Emperor of the Skies and the Slayer of Monsters, Vincent. At full size, Vincent is about 52.5 feet or 60 meters long. He is 6.1 feet or 20 meters tall, while weighing about 260 kilograms or 560 pounds, along with having a wingspan of 75.4 feet or 23 meters long, which alone already makes Vincent an impressive avian specimen. Vincent, along with 3 other males and 4 other female Pteryx, were raised on an island near Scotland. They were produced within the facility on the island with a similar method on how the likes of InGen make their dinosaurs through artificial host eggs, which were synthesized according to the requirements of the hybrids themselves, as well as being provided synthetic proteins inside of these eggs to ensure that the host has the necessary nutrition throughout its gestation in order to survive over the weeks before hatching. Of course, after a few weeks had passed, a male Pteryx hatched out of one of these eggs, in which our geneticist had named Vincent. Vincent, along with the other Pteryx, were sent into the aviary within the facility where they spent their first year hunting insects and other small animals, which were provided by the World Government Organization. Upon further observations, a lot of young Pteryx began working together in order to hunt down and snatch up the various prey items that were provided to them, much like how some modern birds of prey do. They were even taught how to fly on their own. Once Vincent was no larger than a polar bear, he was offered a boar, which were the only few non-hybrid species that are both extremely aggressive and problematic to the environment of the island, which, of course, made it the perfect form of practice in order to prepare them for the war ahead. However, it didn't take long for Vincent to bring the wild hog down, as he sprayed his boiling acid at its eyes, flew out of the charging boar's way, before slamming his talons into the hog, crushing both its neck and ribcage in the process. Afterwards, he began to feed on the boar's carcass, as he was rightfully earned to do so. And eventually, a lot of Pteryx were observed bringing down the wild boars that were sent into the aviary, as they were performing multiple different tactics, whether it be alone or commonly as a group. As they became just as large as a real-life Quetzalcoatlus, the geneticists had released the Pteryx out of the facility. As soon as the gates opened, they immediately ran towards the gates before taking flight, as they flew towards the larger part of the island. Before, the island was overrun with wild boars. However, upon releasing the Pteryx to the rest of the island, It took 4 seasons for the geneticists to start seeing the results of the wild boar population, as it started dropping from overpopulated to moderately decent, as they then started introducing a few other animals for the Dracopteryx to hunt, such as the red deer from Scotland, and the non-hybridized prehistoric species of cattle, the auroch. Upon reaching their full size, the Dracopteryx had since established themselves near the mountains of the island, in which the majority of Dracopteryx had since started building nests on the tops of the various cliffs of each mountain, and being nomadic predators, they often travel from one mountain to another every few years. The number of Dracopteryx went from 8 to about 240 members of that species, which is mostly just a combination of adults and juveniles alike. Trail cams have shown that one time the geneticists had sent forth a decoy that resembled a Tyrannosaurus, which also had speakers that can emit similar vocals. One of the Dracopteryx swooped down as it used its wings to make itself look bigger than it really is in order to attempt to scare off the decoy. As soon as it realized the decoy wasn't backing out of its territory, the Dracopteryx proceeded to attack and tear the decoy apart. This was more than enough for the head commanders of the global government to be satisfied. A task force was sent to tranquilize at least a few Dracopteryx, Vincent included, before sending them on one last field test, where they will clash against the one monster that was the catalyst of the hybrid wars. The transport ship stopped near Isla Nublar before automatically opening the hatches. Vincent was the first to emerge, letting out a few calls as he was rather excited to explore this island. He was also being followed by his mate, his adolescent son, along with a few other Dracopteryx who were not too far behind. Though, Vincent wasn't too well aware, as his presence wouldn't go unnoticed. The Indominus was wandering through the dense foliage before entering the plains of Isla Nublar, as she was forced out of hiding in search of prey. Something was raiding her territory, and food had become scarce. Though driven by hunger, the Indominus stopped for a moment to observe the strange creature soaring above the plains, before moving in as soon as it landed. At last, a potential meal. Though the Indominus stopped again for a moment to observe the strange creature, especially considering she had never seen the likes of Vincent before. Though as soon as Vincent notices something else had just stepped into his newfound turf, he turns around and lets out a loud roar as he confronts the Indominus herself, as the clash between two dragons shall now commence. So, how do one-on-one between these two hybrids go? Well, as much as I wouldn't want to get too far ahead of myself, I think Vincent's got this. Though, I could also see some other cases that might say otherwise. Despite what his size would suggest, he's definitely lighter than the Indominus by comparison, which would probably put him at risk of having his bones crushed like twigs if the Indominus got her jaws on him. However, he could also be quick on the ground due to his capabilities of galloping, as well as allowing him to take flight in order to start attacking from above. He is slightly taller by comparison, with his neck included, which would definitely aid Vincent when it came to attacking the Indominus while galloping past her with his jaws and sharp beak, which are capped with iron along with his teeth. This would allow him to pierce through the Indominus' hide like a knight's sword piercing through a dragon's scales. Not to mention that his tail could prove to be an offensive weapon if swung with respectful force, that or when he turns around to snap at the Indominus on the spot. Though attacking the Indominus with a hidden run tactic would definitely put Vincent at risk, especially considering that she is armed with large claws and bearing teeth of iron, as well as possessing a venomous bite, which is only fatal towards smaller animals. In fact, she wouldn't necessarily need venom since Vincent does have a few weak points. that being his neck, limbs, and his wings, which would certainly put him at risk of being near the kill zone. However, Vincent does have something that not even the Indominus herself would even expect. If the Indominus were to try to dash towards Vincent, or if he just wants distance between him and the Indominus, all he has to do is spew out boiling acid from his mouth, which is more than enough to burn the Indominus' skin. And this acid is especially nasty if Vincent manages to aim for her eyes. This would not only give the Indominus a disadvantage in terms of sight, but this would also allow Vincent to use this to his advantage, for one cannot necessarily hit what they cannot see. If I have to make an assumption, it would probably be a 50-50 in the scenario. Both are quick on land, but Vincent does have the advantages of taking flight, which would kinda put him out of the Indominus' range. Or if she just so happens to have a very convenient, sharpened metal pole, which could serve as an offensive weapon that could definitely kill Vincent if he were to be struck in the chest or through his neck. Though, unless the Indominus inherently knows how to use dinosaur-sized weapons like this, I don't see this as being a very common occurrence. Especially since this thing doesn't look like it's quite built to chuck that thing like how humans would with spears. Of course, 2 or 3 Indominus could easily take on one Pteryx, but that wouldn't necessarily mean the Pteryx would be alone as well. It is a social flocking animal, with each one being literal acid-spewing assassins, especially considering that they're armed with taloned feet, which would allow each one to basically attack the face, the side, or the back of an Indominus. And this method could prove to be effective if one Pteryx just so happens to take out an Indominus' eyes with their boiling acid, while 2 or 3 other members of that flock would attack from the sides, above, or right behind the Indominus. Even if Vincent could take on Goji Center's Indominus 2.0, or mostly stand his ground against most of their hybrids, what were the long-term effects of the Pteryx being introduced to Isla Nublar? What was the global government trying to accomplish? The goal wasn't exactly to see if they could create something to fight the Indominus 2.0,
If only I could.
it's to simply hurt the hybrid monster in the hardest way possible, through competition. Which is a common occurrence where 2 animals who occupy a similar niche would often clash with one another, such as lions and hyenas, for example. Or, in the case of Smilodon and wolves, the wolves had managed to outcompete Smilodon in terms of adaptations, as well as who gets the most prey like deer or bison, in which both predators just so happen to prey on. And in some cases, like with Smilodon, competition can sometimes lead to extinction, especially considering if that one competing species has one particular advantage compared to the other. But how could competition affect the Indominus 2.0 in this case? Especially considering they can multiply quickly. The thing is, Vincent, along with the other Pteryx, can also multiply with great numbers, and not to mention that the Pteryx not only have the advantages of flight, but this also allows them to travel from one part of the island to another, even when in search of prey. This is pretty much why I mostly used avian species, to simply gain an advantage over the Indominus while it's limited to the ground. And most places where Pteryx often nest and breed are on top of the cliff sides of mountains, which serves as a perfect place to keep both their eggs and young Pteryx safe and sound. Especially considering the fact that I can't exactly see an Indominus 2.0 scaling up a mountain just to get to a Pteryx nest anytime soon. Speaking of which, while a fully grown Indominus can be problematic, they're not the most targeted ones. As a matter of fact, it would be the young, juvenile Indominus who are the most targeted. And I'm serious about that. They could literally fall prey towards a Pteryx as much as any smaller animal they could hold within their talons. All they have to do is snatch one up before dropping them down from great heights while letting a little something called gravity do most of the work. And it's not like the Indominus would even have the time nor the place to keep an eye on all of her offspring, especially when the Pteryx began to become more abundant. Their prey would become scarce due to the hunting habits of the Pteryx. The Indominus had no other choice but to resort to killing each other as well as eating their own young just to stay alive, but their conquest had already ended. Isla Nublar went from a land ruled by dinosaurs to a land ruled by dragons. Once the Indominus were slain, various forms of wildlife began to make a comeback ever since, including some of the few surviving non-hybridized dinosaurs. Humanity finally had the chance to restore what was long lost during the hybrid war, and had started to develop weapons that could be used to defend themselves against any future hybrid threats. But the war was far from over. When Mount Cybo erupted, it wiped out every dinosaur on the island, along with some of the other Pteryx as well. At that moment, humanity thought this was likely going to be the very last they would ever see or hear about another Pteryx. Well, at least they hoped it was. So, basically I started working on this video after drawing and designing my hybrid, after seeing so many people coming up with all kinds of hybrids to take on the Indominus 2.0. Now, I know Goji Center already has plans involving their hybrid war events, but honestly, I'm not really expecting my hybrid to make its way in anytime soon. Especially considering that I basically made my own scenario based on what I could gather from what little Goji Center had presented about their hybrid, and as an artist, I welcome a challenge. Also, shoutouts to Goji Center who designed the Indominus 2.0, in which I also don't exactly have any beef with them and their creation, as well as Goji Guy and Madly Mesozoic, who definitely was one of the people who inspired me to actually work on a hybrid of my own. Feel free to check them out if you want. I had a lot of fun designing the Pteryx, aka Vincent, in which I'm really proud of after finishing off some art for it for this video. Speaking of which, I do have a blue sky where I mostly post my art on, in case you're interested in taking a look yourself. Now, I might do another one of these at some point, though probably not anytime soon. But until then, I'll see y'all around. Bye-bye!